Theater Talk is made possible in part by the CUNY TV Foundation. From New York City's beautiful Gramercy Park, this is Theater Talk. I'm the show's producer, Susan Haskins.
And I'm Michael Riedel of the New York Post.
And we are standing in front of this beautiful vintage 19th century mansion, which is now the Players Club.
It was once the home of Edwin Booth, and we're going to have a tour of it conducted by our friend Howard Kissel, who's written a terrific new book, New York Theater Walk, about all the great theatrical sites of New York. So let's go inside and take a look around this really gorgeous, gorgeous house. All right, Howard, now we are in the bar of the Players Club. And the Players Club was originally the home of Edwin Booth, a great American actor. Tell us a little bit about Edwin Booth and his place in the history of American theater.
Edwin Booth was a member of a great acting family. His father was a distinguished actor. He had a brother who was an actor who found himself inclined to making political statements. This was not good for the Booth family.
No.
Nevertheless, one of the interesting things about the Booths is how did they make their reputation? Did they make their reputation doing boulevard farce? Did they make their reputation doing the Neil Simon of the 19th century, whoever that would have been? No. The Booths made their reputations, actors made their reputations in the 19th century by doing Shakespeare.
Gramercy Park, where this house is, was sort of the Fifth Avenue of its day, was it not?
Oh, absolutely. Remember, New York made a very interesting progression. In the 18th century, there was nothing wrong with living above your store. And so all the most successful people lived above the store. But as transportation improved, as it became possible and chic to have your own carriage, then you could live elsewhere. And Gramercy Park, which was based on ideas that were popular in London at the time, was an extremely fashionable place to live. Mm-hmm. But also it's a testimony to the success of Edwin Booth that he was able to build this grand, grand house with the money he made from the show business. And he donated this house to the Players. He established the Players Club. And this is kind of comical, because he wanted to have a place that actors could mingle with gentlemen. Because Booth himself had mingled with gentlemen, it was his fond wish that other actors should be able to sort of move up in them.
And so that was the beginning of the end of society, as we know.
That was, as you're absolutely right,
That's
Michael.
Right.
From there it was pure
down all the way, that's right.
But that was the original purpose of the club.
And he left the club to be the Players Club on his death, right?
Yes. And one of the wonderful things we shall see as we go upstairs is the room in which he died has been preserved exactly as it was.
That'll be the climactic moment of the show, so stick around.
Stay.
All right, so let's go through the Players Club.
Let us go through the Players Club.
I wanted to ask you, Howard, when John Wilkes Booth shot Lincoln, did that end Edwin Booth's career?
No, because after all, that was 1865. I mean, I think there was an understanding that every family has its problem.
That's a pretty big problem.
That was a big
Your brother
problem.
kills the President of the United States.
But as we know, the brother himself soon after died. It was a huge embarrassment for the Booths, but no, their reputation was such that it did not hinder his career.
Now this is the sort of the main entrance hall to the house. Beautiful, beautiful. Right.
If you were a guest of Mr. Booth, you came in this way. That was the way people entertained. The area back there, which is now a dining room, it ended.
The house ended here.
The house ended at that arch where those chairs are. That was built later. It was a garden back there.
This was a garden, yeah.
Garden was, I think, beyond here. But in recent years, and certainly all the time that I've known the Players, This has been a theater with that little stage.
Where you and I have both performed any number of times in the
Project Shaw.
In Project Shaw, indeed. Yes.
Indeed.
I want to look at a couple of the pictures in here.
Okay.
There are a number of well-known actors. Here is Howard Edwin Booth himself.
Edwin Booth,
And
our
what play is
founder.
he in here?
Well, this is a play called The Conspiracy.
And you reviewed it when it first came out? Was that...
I remember it very well. No, it was apparently a play about Cardinal Richelieu, the great power broker in 17th century France. That tells us something interesting, doesn't it, Michael?
Which is?
The theater was about big stuff, like
Exactly.
The
Historical
issue of
sweep
historical,
and narrative,
yeah.
yeah.
And you can see it in the costume, but that grand gesture with his hand.
This is a style of acting, 19th century style of acting, which we don't see anymore. And it was an acting on a big, big level.
It was on a big level. We must remember there was no such thing as amplification. The theaters in 19th century New York were enormous. They routinely sat 2,000 people.
So you had to
you
perform
had
at
to
that
have
level to hit
gestures
them.
like that in order to make sure that the people way up in the balcony, whom apparently you cared about, could understand what was going on.
And of course, as we know, there was no television, so actors didn't have to be little and intimate and tiny, because we see so many TV actors come to the stage now, and they give small performances.
They give small performances because they know that the camera amplifies their work. In the theater, you don't have that. You have to be able to do that.
I wonder if we were to see an Edwin Booth performance today, if it wouldn't just seem too hammy to us.
I have a feeling it might. Audiences accepted that. That was the standard, and he was considered great.
And look at those wonderful eyes. You could probably see those eyes
those
flashing at
eyes.
you from way up in the balcony.
Those eyes are fabulous, yeah. And they did have lighting, so obviously the lighting brought out the eyes. Across the way from our founder, Mr. Booth, is one of the most popular, beloved, and respected actors of the 19th century, Joseph Jefferson.
Great eyes as well.
Great eyes as well. This particular portrait, he is playing one of the classic roles. He's in The Rivals by Richard Brinsley Sheridan. But what Joseph Jefferson was most famous for was an adaptation of Rip Van Winkle.
Which he did for years
For
and years and years.
and he schlepped his production all the way across the country. And when you think of the state of the roads, he became famous, but it was a very grueling road to fame.
In a way, are these actors not the sort of model for the father character in Long Day's Journey into Night?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think Eugene O'Neill was always embarrassed by the fact that his father became famous for playing the Count of Monte Cristo.
Over and over and over.
And there too, I think, he felt that his father could have been a great Shakespearean actor, but his father took the easy way out.
And the heir to that tradition today would, I guess, be Carol Channing, who took Hello Dolly all over the place for years and years.
She takes it all over, and therefore she's built a national following.
Yeah.
Interestingly, and I'm embarrassed to admit this, Michael,
Yes.
there are far fewer portraits of women. Actually, you know what? I'm wrong. There are a lot of portraits of women on the steps. They're
but not here in the main entrance hall.
But
All
not
I
here in
see
the
are
main
men.
entrance hall. And they're not, there was, after all, the equivalent of these two giants, Minnie Mattern Fisk, Mrs. Fisk.
Mrs. Fisk, yeah.
Who also schlepped all across the country, like
Doing
Carol
Ibsen.
Channing, bringing Ibsen, Shaw, to the provinces. So that's heroic, and we shouldn't ignore that. I don't know that Mrs. Fisk would have been eligible to join, since they only began admitting women about 20 years ago.
Right.
But she did okay. Let's not worry about Mrs.
No.
Fisk.
Now, over here on the fireplace is a little admonishment that I always read, and it always makes me chuckle when I come to the Players Club. So if you would favor us with a reading of the golden rule of the Players Club.
Good friend, for friendship's sake, forbear to utter what is gossiped here in social chat, lest unawares thy tongue offend thy fellow players.
Well, I, as a gossip columnist, would be out of a job if actors didn't chatter and gossip away.
Thank God no one has apparently looked at it. I didn't look at it, most of the members, and they all tell you what they shouldn't tell you.
Now, this is my favorite room of the Players Club, because I love the windows here, which look out over Gramercy Park.
It's an extraordinary room. Again, this was a room in which you entertain.
Right. Anything you want to point out here?
These are 3 portraits by John Singer Sargent, one of the great artists of the turn of the 20th century. But the sad thing is, this is one of those reproductions.
Ah, yes, right. Gift of C.
Benedict.
We should say that this painting is a copy of a painting that stood here for a long time.
Which was extraordinarily valuable, and because the players have fallen on hard times, it was sold.
It's too bad that they had to sell them, but I guess they were shoring up the finances.
But this is Booth, and this is yet again Joseph Jefferson.
Right.
Are we allowed to go outside?
Yes, of course, I think we are. And we're going to do Romeo and Juliet out here, Howard, I think.
So, and we haven't rehearsed, so we won't do it right now.
We won't do it.
But yes, this is glorious, and to look, there are very few parts of New York City, as you know, where you can see this much sky.
Now, when the Players Club became the Players Club, this was much closer to the epicenter, the center of where the theater was in New York.
Well,
because the theater's now moved up, as we know, to Times Square, and this has kind of been left behind a little bit.
Yes, because, well, the theater has been a kind of camp follower. As the city moved up from the Battery, the theater was always not far behind. One of the points of my book is to stress how in some cities there is a little area where you may have a few theaters, but in New York, theater has always been a part of the economic life of the city, starting from the earliest days. Now, the theater as we know today, it's a huge part of the economic...
The $2 billion a year industry, apparently.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons people come to New York.
But the difference is Edwin Booth was doing Othello, and now they're doing Shrek.
A big difference, I agree.
That's right.
But nevertheless, theater or show business has been related to the lifeblood of the city. After all, unlike many of the cities on the eastern seaboard, which were founded under religious auspices, we were founded by the Dutch for 2 reasons. Place to make money and have a good time. And that's what we're still doing. Look what an elegant staircase.
Indeed. And now we enter kind of the women's gallery.
Well,
we have, of course, Katharine Hepburn here.
Katharine Hepburn.
Muriel Kirkland, who
none
of us knows anything about.
And of course, the
great
divine Beatrice Lilly.
Yes, yeah.
Who is mainly known for all of the plays that she did with the divine Noel Coward.
And we've got some more women on the wall.
We have, well, over here we have Mrs. Patrick Campbell,
yes,
who was the original Eliza in Pygmalion.
And one of Shaw's favorite.
One of Shaw's favorites. Mm-hmm. We have Rosalind Russell. Mm-hmm. Another illustrator, James Montgomery Flagg, did Rosalind Russell.
This is one of our close friends. She's been on Theater Talk many times. Marion Seld is a great actress.
A great actress.
Member of the Players for a long, long time.
I believe so. And her husband, Garson Kanin, who wrote one of the great comedies of the American theater, Born Yesterday, and was also a very successful director. He certainly, if there is such a thing as a man of the theater, Garson was one. And the same is true of Marion, and among Marion's many achievements is she has taught at Juilliard for many years, so she has brought along many young actors. Mark Twain also had a theatrical career.
And Twain was a friend of Edwin Booth's.
Yeah, after all, an author was not the most respectable person. If you were
like an actor?
Like an actor.
And now we're going to go into another room that's a particular favorite of mine here at the Players, which is the library.
Yes, this was Mr. Booth's library.
This was his library.
And again, a library was an extremely important part of a house in 19th century New York. And again, because Booth was a serious actor, it was important for him to be able to read about all sorts of things.
On this table, Howard, and again, you're going to favor us with another bit of room, this is the letter that Edwin Booth sent to the American people after his brother shot Abraham Lincoln.
Yeah. To the people of the United States, my fellow citizens. Interesting that an actor would address the public in this way. It has pleased God to lay on the door of my afflicted family the lifeblood of our great, good, and martyred president, prostrated to the very earth by this dreadful event. I am yet but too sensible that other mourners fill this land. To them, to you, one and all, go forth our deep, unutterable sympathy, our abhorrence and detestation for this most foul and atrocious of crimes. Again, the language is Shakespearean, and he concludes, your afflicted friend, Edwin Booth, New York, April 20th, 1865.
And the third flight of stairs on the way to see Edwin Booth's bedroom. Look who's here.
Look who's
at the top
here.
of the stairs, waiting to
Michael,
greet us.
good to see you again.
John Martello, who is the head of the Players Club. John, nice to see you.
Thank you, nice
you
to
know
see you.
your
I don't
fellow
know,
player,
John.
Howard Kissel.
Nice to see
Great
you.
pleasure, great
And-
man of
Yes.
the theater.
And you have joined us to take us on sort of the highlight
Final
of the
quest
tour
in our,
of the Players
in our
Club.
pilgrimage.
Well,
So now we are in the sort of the inner sanctum, if you will,
Yeah.
of the Players Club. This is Edwin Booth's bedroom, and it is today the way it was the night he died.
yes, in June of 1893.
1893.
And when he turned the club over to the membership, all he requested in return was that he have a place where he could stay when he was in New York. And this was his room, and as he said, he died in that bed. That's his day bed next to it, his funeral wreath there. Now in that corner, you notice a photograph and a small portrait. The top photograph is of his brother John Wilkes, and he never spoke his name after the assassination.
Really?
But he always kept the picture by his bedside. They were devoted to each other.
They were. So before the assassination, they were close brothers.
Extremely
there was
close.
no estrangement there ever. until
Yes,
the-
and people forget the fact that John Wilkes was a very successful actor in his own right. He was very, very popular in the South and other areas of the country as a matinee idol, and many critics felt he had great promise. But that was dashed.
he got the spotlight and
Absolutely.
And there's a portrait of a woman below.
Yes,
his brother.
that's Booth's second wife. She was an actress, and it wasn't a very long marriage and very unhappy, because she had mental problems and went mad not long after they were married and died in an institution. There's some family portraits of another brother who was a doctor, and his mother and his grandchildren. But the gentleman there, the bald gentleman with the mustache, was a founding member of the club. That's the great Tommaso Salvini, who was considered the great Othello of the late 19th century, an Italian actor, and is an account of a production that he did at the Brooklyn Academy, where he played Othello in Italian, and Booth and the rest of the company did the show in English, and it was a magnificent production.
Booth doing Iago?
Iago, yes.
Oh,
And if I'm
fascinating.
not mistaken, one of Salvini's greatest fans was a man named Constantine Stanislavski,
Absolutely correct.
who was constantly touting Salvini
That was
as his idea of a great actor.
the inspiration for Stanislavski's books.
Interesting.
Yes.
Now, whose decision was it when Booth died to leave the room the way it
Well,
the way it is?
I think it was the club's decision. I mean, he was extremely revered.
Yeah.
And I mean, as he is today, but even more so because there were people that knew him,
And who
worked
had
with
seen
him,
him act.
and seen him act. To the point, and you probably know the story very well, that Booth, one of the hallmarks of Booth's career was his playing Hamlet on Broadway for 100 performances. And when John Barrymore in the early 20s was playing Hamlet, as he was starting to approach his 80th, 82nd performance, a delegation from the club actually went to him and said, now, Jack, you know, Mr. Booth only did 100, so you should quit at 99. And of course, Barrymore did 101.
And look what happened to him.
That's right. No one's touring his house.
But that chair and the other one against the wall, those are from his productions of Hamlet. And he smoked about 15 cigars and pipes a day. Let's see, what other artifacts seem of interest? Well, this portrait here is of his first wife. That's the love of his life, Mary Devlin. And she died not long after giving birth to their daughter, Edwina.
And I assume this is York.
Yes, absolutely. You know the story about this one, right?
No.
Okay, well, first of all, have you talked about Junius Brutus Booth, the father? One of the 2 or 3 popular actors in the first half of the 19th century. And they would travel throughout the country. It was before radio, before TV, and movies, obviously. And they would go out to the West. And they'd play mining towns and cowboy towns. And people knew, even if they were illiterate, they knew the Bible, and they knew a lot of Shakespeare by heart.
Yeah. We were talking about that earlier?
Well, this is authenticated. Around the 1840s, they had caught up with a horse thief out west. And as they put the noose around his neck, he said, I have one request. Please give my skull to Mr. Booth, meaning Junius Brutus, so I can be in his productions of Hamlet.
Oh, that's thrilling. I did not know
this
that.
was
Great.
used by Junius and handed down to Edwin. And it only left this room once since Booth's death, and that was on the centenary, I guess it would have been 1993, the centenary of Booth's death. Steve Lang was doing Hamlet at the Roundabout, and they took this with under armed guard and swaddling and everything else, and they brought it up to the Roundabout.
Well, will you give Jude Law, who's coming to Broadway this season in Hamlet, a chance to...
I sure will. We'll give him a chance to do that.
And
Absolutely.
it's signed by Edwin Booth.
Yes, and we think that's a Masonic sign there as well, because he was a master mason.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. Fascinating. Here, Howard, you want to...
Oh, it's thrilling to think that a cowboy wanted to be in Hamlet.
Is that amazing?
It's a different world.
He wanted to play York, but what he really wanted to do was direct.
Yeah. And there's one quote here, I think. And when the smoke ascends on high, then thou beholdest the vanity of worldly stuff, gone with a puff. Thou think and smoke tobacco.
Right. Not Shakespeare.
No. You're right. You found something there, Howard?
This is very sweet. Outside, a magnificent thunderstorm raged through the city, lighting the room fitfully. Then, after one prodigious crash, the lights went out. "Don't let father die in the dark," Edwina screamed hysterically. Lightning played in the room, then the storm died away. Booth died with it, breathing his last at 17 minutes after 1 o'clock on the morning of June 7th, 1893. He died peacefully. It was like the passing of a shadow. Darling of Misfortune by Richard Lockridge. But that's a perfect thing to have here.
Thank you very much,
Great,
John.
Michael. Good to see you again.
Thank you.
Great
Thank
to
you.
see
Howard,
you,
always a
John.
pleasure.
And Howard, the inspiration for our little tour today of the Players Club was your book called
New York Theater Walk, 7 self-guided walking tours of New York relating to the theater. And in fact, there's a chapter at the end called Odds and Ends, in which I discuss the Players Club because it's not close to a lot of places. What I've tried to do in the book is not just write about the theater district, but for example, write about the Village, because there's a lot of theater history in the Village. There's a lot of theater history on the Lower East Side.
and a lot around Union Square.
A
where
lot
of
around
theaters
Union
were.
Square, which is close to the Lower East Side. We do a couple of walks on the Upper West Side because a lot of theater people have lived there. And then, as I say, there are odds and ends.
Well, just to finish up on our conversation with Edwin Booth, I mean, he came from a time, everybody now goes to acting school, everybody goes to conservatories and Juilliard, but Edwin Booth, there were no acting schools in his day.
In those days, you joined a company.
And you learned how to act by
You carried
watching.
a spear, you watched the other people, and by the time it came your turn to play Hamlet, you had already played half the other roles. You knew it by heart. You didn't have to sit up nights memorizing it. But that's how you learned to act, and you did it in front of an audience, not in front of fellow students or a teacher. I think that the whole notion of acting as something, again, one of the bad things about the actor's studio is the notion that there's something that actors do that's so precious is it can't be done in front of an audience. It can only be done in front of other actors.
And Edwin Booth was doing it, as we learned, in front of 2,000 people.
Exactly.
I wonder if you could sort of send us out with a little Shakespeare. I know you dabble in acting from time to time, and we are, after all, in the home of one of the great Shakespearean actors.
Well, I hadn't prepared something, but let me recite my favorite sonnet. When to the sessions of sweet silent thought I summon up remembrance of things past, then can I sigh the lack of many a thing I sought, and with old woes new wail my dear time's waste. Let's cut to the chase. But if the while I think on thee, dear friend, all losses are restored and sorrows end.
Thank you, Howard.
Thank you, Michael.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our thanks to the Friends of Theater Talk for their significant contribution to this production.
Theater Talk is made possible in part by the Frederick Lowe Foundation, the Eleanor Naylor Dana Charitable Trust, the Alan S. Gordon Foundation, the Corey and Bob Donnelly Charitable Fund, Carrie J. Fries, the Dorothy Strelson Foundation, the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs, and the New York State Council on the Arts, a state agency.
Playbill Online is the official website of Theater Talk and the home of the Playbill Club, providing information and opportunities for theater lovers. We welcome your questions or comments for Theater Talk. Thank you and good night.